Hey, y'all, welcome back to a Monday, March 10th, 2025 edition here on the Chase Thomas podcast, where I'm still the aforementioned Chase Thomas coming to you live from Knoxville, Tennessee, Everything School HQ. It is Monday, so you know what that means. We got a pod divided with fellow University of North Georgia alumni Matt Green talking all things Tennessee and Georgia Bulldogs, along with college football as a whole. So we dive into spring practice, names to know for both Tennessee and Georgia. We talk about who has the toughest SEC schedule in 2025. We do a deep dive in the program report series this week with Oklahoma, and then a little bit of CFB rule change possibilities in 2025 as well. We also have a special guest. We got Greeneville's Eddie Spradlin, coach of those Green Devils here in East Tennessee, one of the best football programs at the prep ranks here in East Tennessee. So it was awesome getting Eddie on the program for the first time. Big offseason for the Green Devils and Alcoa moving into 4A. We talked about that and how the season ended last year, Anderson County, and what things look like this spring and summer for position battles and the offseason program for Greenville. So jam-packed Monday show for you guys today. Don't forget, if you are not already, and this is your first time checking out the Chase Thomas podcast here on YouTube, make sure you hit that subscribe button if you like what you hear today. And also leave us a comment in the comments below throughout the premiere of this episode. Let us know what you think with today's episode and all that good stuff. You can also make sure you hit that thumbs up button. Helps other people find the show along with those comments. So more and more folks here in East Tennessee can listen to Knoxville's #1 independent Tennessee Vols sports podcast on the daily here on the YouTube channel at Chase Thomas Podcast. So all that good stuff as well. So make sure you're locked in every day here, as we are well over 2,000 subs and growing more and more in each and every day. So make sure you tell a friend, family, or coworker who are Vol fans and maybe don't know about the show yet. So if you could do that today, I would greatly appreciate it. All right, Uncle Darren, let's go.
The Chase Thomas podcast. My nephew needs me to record. See, I already hate it. I hate it.
All right, hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Chase Thomas podcast, where I'm still the aforementioned Chase Thomas coming to you live from Knoxville, Tennessee, Everything School HQ. Joining me, my good friend, fellow University of North Georgia alumni, and host of the Georgia Voice of College Football show on YouTube, Matt Green. Matt, good evening, sir. How are you?
Good evening, sir. It is good to be back with you, man. March Madness, sir, is alive and well. I'm loving it. I'm sure you are as well. Everything School HQ.
Tennessee finishing #1 in KenPom defense again this season under Rick Barnes. SEC tournament this weekend. Tennessee they get a double bye, so they don't play until Friday. Still tough loss at Ole Miss, so it doesn't look like a 1 seed is going to happen for Tennessee for the first time in school history. But baseball, man, going to be probably #1 in the country when the polls come out again. They've been #1 in some spots. The coaches poll, I think they've been #1, but now they're just
no one cares about baseball right now. Get out of here.
Well, that's not true, because if you've been keeping up with Twitter, John Tweet Sports, Georgia fan, has been going to war with Tennessee Twitter over the weekend, calling out Tennessee's ballpark dimensions for some of the home runs and what would be home runs at Lindsey Nelson versus.
I'm sure John Tweet Sports is very fair and unbiased about it. So, I have his back there.
I don't have it in like it. I think it's interesting with people like with different fan bases. Like Tennessee's got a passionate one, obviously. Georgia's got one. Bama's got one. I mean, I don't have to list all the passionate fan bases online, but to do the Jon Snow thing, the Battle of the Bastards, to just pull the sword out and go 1 on 1,000, being like, I'm just poking the bear. The defending national champions in college baseball, the undisputed best program in college baseball, the juggernaut of college baseball, that's one of 2 undefeated teams left in college baseball right now, Tennessee and Florida State, to poke the bear. I respect it, because I don't have that in me, and he went about, like, he handled it. So I guess kudos to him, man, because I'm not going to do that against Georgia fans. I'm not going to go poking the bear for Georgia football right now. I mean, they've got a good thing cooking here. Tennessee's trying to get there, but Tennessee baseball, I mean, I just look at it as like, y'all can say whatever you want. Like, America can say whatever they want about Tennessee baseball. It doesn't matter. Like, you won the national championship this past year, defending national champs. You are in good shape to do it again this year. It's really, really hard, obviously, to go back to back. South Carolina was the last team to do it over a decade ago. But, I mean, you're smashing home runs. You're getting first round picks. MLB is just going to be like half Tennessee players in the next 3 years.
Get out of here.
I mean,
they won one title, okay. You know, let's just take it easy. This isn't a dynasty or anything, but you know, we don't have. I don't have the energy to argue baseball right now. It's still basketball season. You know, let's just not get ahead of ourselves. The story is the Georgia Bulldogs, sir. The so hot right now. Gonna get to the tourney for the first time since like 2014 or something like that, 2015. Big time story. Dogs going dancing, sir. And also this year with the SEC tournament, with all these, what is there? I don't know what the current rankings are, but a few weeks ago there was like 5 in the top 8 or something SEC teams. The SEC tournament's got to carry a lot of weight this year. Tennessee wins the tournament, they're definitely a 1 seed. I think whoever wins the SEC tournament, if it's one of those teams that's like on the fringe, Florida, Alabama, Auburn, Tennessee, I think any of those teams win the SEC tournament, they're going to be a 1 seed. No?
Well, it hasn't mattered in the past. So it's been like Texas A&M obviously had a great run 2 years ago, made it to the finals, and they ended up it not mattering, and they did not make the tournament, even with their big time showing in the SEC tournament. Tennessee won the whole thing a couple years ago, and it didn't change where their ranking ultimately ended up after they won it. So it just kind of depends on, like you said, what makes this year different potentially with the folks putting the bracket together is that the SEC is the best conference in college basketball. And like you said, there's a bunch of teams in the top group, and there's just such a thin margin of error. And Alabama beating Auburn on Saturday made everything even more complicated because Tennessee beats them on the last second last week, and Alabama beats Auburn on the last second. Tennessee only lost at Auburn by one basket a month ago. Tennessee beat Florida, and then Florida beat Tennessee. So it's just very muddled together. So maybe we'll see if it matters. But part of me is like, because Tennessee has an 8-man rotation, it's like, do you want to run that risk of going balls to the wall for a potential 1 seed if you're Rick Barnes and company?
Get out of here, sir. No one's resting any players. You're trying to win the conference tourney.
I mean, at this point, I don't think Tennessee is going to get the 1 seed. So I would sit guys. I would do the load management, and I would rest Sakai, rest guys, and just get out of there.
No,
because I think it benefited Tennessee to be one and done. When Mississippi State knocked them out in the first game last year, I think it served Tennessee well and for their Elite 8 run. I think the time off could help.
These guys don't need extra time. These aren't 35-year-old NBA vets. They might be at Auburn, but it's they don't need all that. They're gonna get like a week off for the SEC for the NCAA tournament, or what, like 4 or 5 days off. That's like if you're playing in the conference championship, that's plenty of time.
But it's also like tough games. Like if you run the gauntlet, you might have to beat Florida and Bama and back to back. Like it's just you're playing some of the best, and you're having to go balls to the wall before the thing that actually matters. So I don't know. Like I'm okay with hearing both sides of this. I'm just saying, personally, I would tank at this point. I would tank the first game, and I would get out of there because I don't think Tennessee's going to be a 1 seed. I think they're pretty much locked into that 2 group in the East with Duke.
Interesting.
So I would tank it. I would just be like, Bishop Boswell and company, we're tanking this bad boy, and we're getting out of here.
Just think about whoever wins this, because this year is just different than any other year ever. I don't think you can really compare it to another season. So just the fact that the SEC is as loaded as it is, to win the conference, you're most likely going to maybe have 2 or 3 top 5, top 6 wins to just add on to your resume. Like I think that's gonna go a long way. But I think Tennessee is definitely a contender there. And I don't know what the numbers are, but I feel like obviously we've seen at least 1 16. Have we seen 2 16-1 upsets? Has that happened twice in recent years? I know the Virginia one happened. Is that the only one?
No, last year, right? Was it last year or 2 years ago?
I'm thinking another one happened, right? Yeah. I can't remember what off the top of my head, but the 15 is more common, but more specifically that second round, I feel like the 7-10 beats one of
Yeah,
the two
FDU
seeds.
versus Purdue in 2023. Yes,
There
Purdue.
you go. I
think
knew it
happened,
happened again.
Yeah.
But obviously, so it has happened a couple times recently, but
Mhm.
it feels like the 1 beats the 8-9, or I should say the other way. The 2-7 upsets the 7-10 upsets the 2 way more often than the 8-9 upsets the 1. In my like just anecdotal like memory here, it just feels like if you get the 1 seed, it feels like a much more guaranteed Sweet 16 than a 2 seed. Obviously, nothing's guaranteed in the tournament, but just off, I would like to be a 1 seed if I was Tennessee.
I mean, I would want to be a 1 seed too. I just don't trust the committee valuing Tennessee running the gauntlet and winning the tournament and giving them a 1 seed. I don't know. It would be a surprise to me if that's the way it went by Sunday afternoon, but you never know. I guess it's possible, but my gut is no. And I think the bracket, hold on, what is the bracket? SEC tournament bracket. And I could tell you who Tennessee would have to beat to win it all, because Georgia plays
Georgia plays Oklahoma.
Yeah. So that's
when is that game?
Wednesday. They play Wednesday after game 3. So that's a night game. Y'all are playing late on Wednesday. And then Tennessee's in the top half. So we would only meet if Tennessee and Georgia made the finals. Tennessee
basically to win the conference tournament, Tennessee would most likely have to beat Texas A&M, Auburn, and then like Florida or Alabama. Like that's
no, not even just Florida or Alabama. Oh yeah, just Florida or Alabama. Never mind. Yes, you're correct. Right. Like they would have to beat A&M, Auburn, or Florida, Alabama. Like
if you do that, I think that gets you a 1 seed.
But that's a war, man. That's a lot of wear and tear for something that doesn't matter. The whole point is the Final Four. You went to the Elite Eight last year. You want to get to the Final Four. Like that, you have a big eye on the prize, man. So I don't know. I understand the 1 seed, and I would push for the 1 seed. I've been on it all year that Tennessee is right there in the conversation, and I just wouldn't put the faith in the committee to give Tennessee a 1 seed, even if they ran the gauntlet here. So I don't know. I just don't trust them. So I would rather just be like, we're not playing your game. We've been down this road, so we're opting out. I'm opting out, Matt Green. It's the theme of college sports these days. I'm opting out.
Bad call. Just win, baby.
Another win though. We don't have to see Georgia's home court for another year. That's a pretty nice development. And those nasty gray uniforms.
It's a gauntlet. People don't want to see that home court. It's you're lucky to not have to see that.
It's the ugliest court. I saw my brother was at the game on Saturday and he sent a picture, and
it's not that bad.
It's an ugly court.
They're trying to do their own thing, I respect it. Bringing that old school bulldog.
Yeah, but it's the bulldog behind the G. Like it's so much going on. It's the busiest court. It's like something Phil Knight in Oregon would be like, that's too much. You're doing too much. Like that's something
I feel like we have this conversation every week. I feel like Kirby Smart brought that logo back. Honestly, like
I like
Kirby's
that logo.
Georgia gear has that old school bulldog. Now it's on the court. That's
all you need. Has. Get rid of the G or something. Like get rid of the other stuff, and you don't have any. Where does this gray nonsense? The silver britches. Like what are we doing with the silver britches uniforms here? Like,
I mean, I respect the paying homage to the football program. That's really what the silver is, but
they're not all silver. The silver is just the pants, and the
basketball uniforms are all one color. Yeah, I mean that
it just doesn't work.
No, I mean the silver's fine. I don't like that jersey, like with the G. It's not doing it for me. It
looks like a track uniform.
They've done great, like they've done silver or gray, whatever you want to call it, in the past, and I feel like it's looked good. But no, I'm not a fan of those. And they've had a couple big wins now. The Florida game, the Vandy game. So it's like if we get like I guess they'd probably have to wear them if they're the higher ranked seed. So they're most likely a 9 or 10 or something, right? At best. So hopefully we see the black or the red or something.
Can I tell you that my tackiest jersey take that I'll never, you probably won't agree with this. The Georgia uniforms they wore against Boise in the Dome, I liked. With the red striped helmet, with the silver helmet, with the red stripe. Wow. And
it's the helmet that was
I don't know why I like them. If it wasn't Georgia, I would have liked them. And like, it just like if UNLV had uniforms like that and all of that was just UNLV, I'd be like, those are pretty cool.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like North Gwinnett High School. like changes up their uniforms like Georgia would never do, but it's like they're red and black, the Bulldogs, and it's like they do a bunch of different stuff. It's like if Georgia did it, it would look good, but Georgia can't be changing it up. No, I think the helmet was the only part I hated. Like the jerseys, as far as like just being an alternate, like you wanted to be one of those cool exclusive programs that Nike was giving the pro combat uniforms to. So it's like, yeah, you did like a weird alternate, but the helmet is what I didn't like. They messed up the helmet. I feel like they didn't do none of the other teams had helmets that just looked dumb like that. The super thick stripe, you liked that? You were a fan of the different color face mask too?
I don't know how to explain it. I'm looking at it right now. I did like it, and it's the tackiest thing. But if you had told me, like, all this is bad because it's Georgia, but I would have done, if UNLV had this, I would say these are sick. It's just because it's Georgia. Also, the other one I forgot about that just came up beside it. Do you remember the black helmet with the red face mask? With the white jersey?
The 2009 Florida game.
These aged well. I'm okay with these. Did you like these?
No, those are terrible. The helmets, once again, the helmets are terrible.
You think these helmets are bad?
The black helmet with the red face mask? Yeah,
I think it looks okay.
Oh, no. I was not a fan of those, personally.
Interesting. I'm glad they haven't gone with the all icy whites, because everyone's doing like the all icy whites and the all black uniforms, and like Iowa State should be banned from ever wearing the all black. Like, what are we doing? Where we've let every school do this, where it's like, these are not your colors. What are we doing?
Georgia would have a very simple, just same uniforms every game, then just throw in the black jersey every once in a while. That's all they have to do. They don't have to do anything crazy.
Just do one black jersey a year. I don't know why they don't do the black jersey.
I don't know. We don't have to get down this. We don't have to get down this road. A lot of history down this road.
Well, Matt Green, as this is a pod divided for the Vols versus the Dogs, we start off with our Tennessee and Georgia minutes here, Matt Green. And first things first is we have some spring practice happening. Spring practice kicked off for Tennessee on Friday morning, back here on Monday as folks are listening to this, back to start the week this week, and before the team departs for spring break, I think next week. But Matt Green, spring practice, who are you most curious about showing out for the Dogs over the next couple weeks on your end? I wrote about this today over at sportsrenaissanceman.com for my 3 key Vols to know here for 25 in their spring practice. But who on your end for the Georgia side of things are you most curious about keeping up with over the next couple days here?
So I'll go like 2 different directions with this about like kind of what Georgia's floor is versus what Georgia's ceiling is. And so when it comes to Georgia's floor, like that's when I want to see what Georgia looks like on the defensive line, like on the defensive side of the ball in general. Like obviously there's some defensive backs that have some, inexperience and some new faces back there. But I feel like Georgia's had the floor they've had for the last 8 years because the defense has basically been elite every year. And I would say, outside of maybe 2 of those seasons. And like with so much experience on the defensive line, like I think that's really important with Georgia giving up like 120 yards a game on the ground last year. Like, who really knows, where the floor is on this team with how tough this schedule is and the inexperience. So if the defensive is just elite and it's back to, being what it's supposed to be, like then this team, the floor is like a 10-2 team, right? The floor is literally number 7 in the country. Like the last 8 years, Georgia's finished number 7 twice. Like that's been the floor over the last 8 years of Georgia football. So if the defense is that, and more specifically, I think what everyone wants to see, Elijah Griffin, the true freshman 5-star defensive tackle that you've heard so much about. Like if that guy is a day 1 impact player, like maybe you feel a little bit better. But other than that, it's going to be some of those guys that were 3rd, 4th on the depth chart. Hopefully they're ready to play more big time minutes. And obviously, go ahead.
Well, Elijah Griffin's it's defensive line, right? Because Georgia has, I don't know what they're going to do at Leo. Like, are they just going to try out a bunch of people on the edge? Or is there still like, we're going to wait for the spring portal to add someone to fill that spot? Because I don't think they had an obvious replacement for Damon Wilson this offseason. Like, it just kind of seemed like he was going to slide into that role this year. And now that with him at Mizzou, I feel like that's going to be a pretty interesting battle and what Kirby decides to do and what kind of reps. Like, that's something I'm going to monitor for Georgia is, like, I want to see who's getting reps at Leo and if they're moving guys around to fill that spot out of necessity.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the positions I'm most worried about. I don't know does Georgia call it Leo? I don't know if it's called Leo in their system.
Oh, that's true. I don't know.
But yeah, that Damon Wilson, that Chaz Chambliss role, I think Gabe Harris is probably the guy who's played the most snaps at that position to this point. But yeah, there's a lot of unproven guys. Obviously, I'm skeptical about relying on a true freshman at that position. But you did bring in, oh man. Now I'm blanking on his name. Who's the number one edge rusher? Oh man, why am I blanking on his name right now? You know what I'm talking about though. Jaden Walker. I'm blanking on his name right now, but you remember who I'm talking about. But as a true freshman, I don't know that I trust him making an impact from day one. So that's what I mean. Like in terms of like how good Georgia is, where the floor is. It's on the defensive side of the ball. But
Isaiah Gibson?
Isaiah Gibson. There you go. Yeah. And then who's the number one linebacker? I'm blanking on his name as well.
Oh, that's another Wilson for y'all. But he's not a freshman this year, right? You're talking about the second year player from Texas who was a 5-star last year?
No, that's Justin Williams.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
In this 2025 class, though. Who is the number one linebacker? Zykevious Walker's brother that went to Auburn.
You're not talking about for Georgia. He's not a linebacker at Georgia.
Yeah,
Zayden Walker.
Zayden Walker. There you go. Yeah. I knew it was a Z Walker name. Yeah. So he's the number one linebacker, but Isaiah Gibson, number one edge rusher. But yeah, so in terms of like, okay, how do we feel about Georgia? And what do you really learn about the defensive line in the spring? It's hard to say. But I think that's a huge point. But then at the end of the day, like that's a huge talking point. That's where the floor of Georgia is going to be next year. But in terms of what the ceiling of Georgia is, it has to be the quarterback competition. I mean, that has to be the number one story, simply because this is rarely a story when it comes to Georgia football. Like, as we've talked about it before, it's almost comical how many Georgia seasons under Kirby Smart have ended with a guy who wasn't the starter to start the season. And still how much consistent success Georgia's had with that. But most off seasons have really not been controversial. Like even when Justin Fields was there, it was pretty obvious who the starter was, So you look at 2020 is basically the only other year where you go into that off season without an incumbent starter in the competition. You go back to Jacob Eason and Grayson Lambert. It's like that was a competition, but one guy has been a starter for a season, right? Like Gunnar Stockton has started one game. So it's the fact that you have so much inexperience at the quarterback position, and that's going to be two guys that are essentially have never started before. That at the end of the day, how good, and like I said, where the ceiling of Georgia is, it's going to be what happens in the quarterback room.
I'm curious how much of it's open, right? Like how much of it is really just like Puglisi gets a real shot here to beat out Gunnar. How much of it is just he's a lot younger than Gunnar. Gunner's been in the system for a long time. Gunnar has been familiar with the Bobo fam for a long time. There is some familiarity there. Bobo's son is the center. There's a Bobo Stockton connection right there. I just feel like it's going to have to be Gunnar struggles a lot early. Like I see it just being very unlikely that Puglisi is going to be starting for Georgia early on. I mean, the big test, it's going to be weird, but Tennessee week 3 for Georgia, like they're coming to Knoxville. It's an early game for Georgia for the first time in a long time. It's like you said, new starting quarterback. He was okay against Notre Dame, but part of what he struggled with, like Carson Beck and Stetson Bennett picked Tennessee apart. Like part of what Tennessee's issues defensively have been over the 4 years, and there haven't been many because Tennessee has gotten better defensively under Tim Banks every single year he's been there. This was a top 10 scoring defense last year. But Georgia carved them up because Carson Beck was just killing them over the middle with the tight end looks with Urasek and Delp, and was just like they couldn't get home. So Carson Beck has an NFL arm and was able to stand in the pocket and just throw the ball 40 times and not get touched. He wasn't touched once in that game. Gunnar
made a couple plays with his legs in that one too.
Right. I don't know if Gunner has that. Like, doesn't mean he does or does not, but I do think it's interesting. It's like, can Gunner beat Tennessee in the way that the guy like Graham Mertz diced Tennessee up the same way? And I don't know if he's that kind of guy. Like, I don't know if he's going to be able to just sit in the pocket if Tennessee's not able to get home and just dice Tennessee up that way in Knoxville with the crowd. But like, it doesn't mean he can't, but I do have that game circled. I think it's going to be the most I think it's going to be the most contested Georgia-Tennessee game we've seen to this point in the 5 years of Heupel versus Kirby, not just because it's in Tennessee, but because it's so early in the season and Georgia has so many new pieces on the offensive line, so many new pieces at wide receiver, new starting quarterback. These are all that's a lot of new acclimation on the road in a hostile atmosphere where against a team that's only lost in that building once to you 2 years ago in the last 3 years. So I don't know. I think he would have to really struggle, and Georgia would have to drop some games. But Georgia's also got a schedule where they don't have a big margin of error. Like Georgia's got one of the toughest college schedules. Like I feel kind of bad for Georgia because I think the way people are looking at like Florida's schedule and South Carolina's schedule and Oklahoma, and they're like, oh, it's terrible. It's like part of it's because they're not that good. Like that's part of the reason that these schedules are really hard for those teams is because they're not that good. They're not built like Georgia and Alabama and Texas and these other ones. Like that is why it's a little bit harder for them is that they're not favored in a lot of these games that those other better teams in the SEC would be against that kind of schedule. So I do think like, Georgia has a really tough schedule.
Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, like, I just think Georgia's schedule is really, really tough. And I mean, you had last year where Carson Beck really struggled, who I think had a higher ceiling than Gunner. And he basically had the yips for a little bit. So, I mean, Gunner is going to go through the hornet's nest. And you can make the case that next year's schedule for Georgia is harder than this past year.
I think just because so many games were on the road last year is what made it so tough. But yeah, that 2023 Tennessee game, like that's one of the best games Carson Beck played in a Georgia uniform.
Yeah.
Like he was straight up dealing. Like that was, Dylan Bell was catching everything. Those are some of the best throws I ever saw Carson Beck make. But yeah, I mean, you look at this 20, and that's kind of what I told you last year, 2024. Like everyone's talking about Florida's tough schedule. But Georgia's really the one that has the toughest schedule because they're the ones that's actually playing relevant games. So all the top 5, top 10 teams they're playing are top 5, top 10 matchups because both teams are really good. But yeah, Oklahoma, I mean, maybe they could be that this year. And we'll get into, those SEC schedules and everything. But I mean, yeah, I think Carson Beck became such a polarizing figure in the Georgia fan base. It's almost like when Mark Richt got fired. It's like we can all just be rowing in the same direction now. Maybe there just be some harmony, on the Georgia fan base. But like I've said, their track record, Georgia fans' track record with Georgia with quarterback criticisms isn't exactly great. But so I'm definitely in the camp that Carson Beck was a very good quarterback. I think Georgia won the SEC despite a lot of the weaknesses all around Beck last year. So yeah, I question if Gunner's got to throw the ball 40 times a game like Carson Beck was having to do against Alabama, against Ole Miss, and obviously those were both losses for Gunner for Beck a year ago. But yeah, I do question Gunner's ability to do that if that's what Georgia's offense has to be next year. Like Georgia can't be 102nd in the SEC or in the country in rushing offense and be winning the SEC next year. Like that's not in the cards. They don't have that guy at quarterback. And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe Gunner, is a superstar, but I just don't. I think if he's a superstar, most likely his legs are an aspect of that.
And I think part of it is like you talk about like the road games, like at Texas, at Ole Miss, like that was you lose
at Alabama.
But the difference, though, I would say this year for Georgia and why it could be harder, because even though they do get Bama, it doesn't matter. Like they have Bama, Tennessee, Texas, and Ole Miss all on the schedule. I'll say Tennessee.
3 of those are at home though. Like that is massive.
It's 3 top 10 games. Like that's the thing. Is like these are 3 coin flip games for Georgia. I think in some capacity. Like you can look. I understand Tennessee.
You're saying four coin flip games.
Well, I'm saying I don't think Ole Miss is a coin flip at home. I think I would be very surprised with a new quarterback and I think Ole Miss is gonna be.
They dominated Georgia worse than anyone did.
Walter Nolan and Princely aren't on that team anymore. I don't know. Maybe
fair.
I could be wrong, but I don't think. I think Georgia will be favored by like 14 by the time Georgia Ole Miss comes around. But we'll see. My broader point is that I think Florida will be better, and Florida gave you problems. I think there's a path that Florida is a lot better this time around, and they gave you problems in the first half. I also just think at Auburn, like Auburn went all out this offseason. Like you saw what Georgia did at Auburn 2 years ago. I mean, that Brock Bowers had to go Super Saiyan for Georgia to pull that game out on the road. Like that's going to be like they haven't been really competitive in Athens, but that game 2 years ago, I would caution people to just pencil that one in as like a Georgia should roll there. I think that's going to be. I mean, if it's not Tennessee that gets Georgia and trips them up on the road, Auburn on the road, I think is going to be tough. Like, I think it's going to be one of those where Auburn has a bunch of talent now. They've recruited extremely well under Hugh Freeze. They were very active again in the portal. Like, if Jackson Arnold can get some of that juice he had back on the Plains, like, they have a really talented roster that it would not surprise me if they break through a little bit next year. And they played Georgia really well with below average quarterback play 2 years ago and nearly won that game. So that's one I have circled. If it's not Tennessee early that trips up Georgia on the road, I mean, this is just I look at the schedule. The broader point is the schedule is really, really tough. I mean, Georgia fans are going to love this schedule, I think, once we get to it, because, I mean, you get Alabama at home. That's awesome. You get Texas at home. That's awesome. You get Ole Miss back at home. That's awesome. I don't know. I mean, it's just, you have so many big games at home for the first time in a long time that I mean, yeah, they're going to be highly contested games and it's not a guarantee you win them all, but man, that's a fun home slate. Like that's all, like It's just banger after banger in your building.
It'll be fun if they win the games. If they lose the games,
I mean, they're going to win the majority. It's Kirby Smart. Like they're going to win the majority.
Yeah, and I think Georgia's won, I think is it 30, 31 in a row at home come into this season. So, we'll see if that streak can last the gauntlet that is this season. But yeah, I've said that a bunch. It's like this schedule is ridiculous. And it's interesting because it kind of feeds into what we're going to talk about later with the SEC schedules. But these schedules being what it is on paper right now isn't even including Florida or Auburn being a good team. So if either of those are good, and even Georgia Tech, so it could be interesting. It could be even more difficult than it looks right now on paper.
Absolutely. On the Vols side of things, Matt Green. So I wrote about this today that folks can go check out at sportsrenaissanceman.com. And there are three names that I have circled for me in terms of the spring practice opening up that I think Vol fans should be aware of. And those three are Braylon Staley, slot receiver, second-year player, redshirt freshman, former four-star recruit in the 25 class, for Tennessee. No, 24, I had it right. 24 class. And you also have William Satterwhite, redshirt freshman now, who is on track to replace Cooper Mays at center, four-year starter Cooper Mays for Tennessee. And then Tyree West, four-star senior, strong side defensive end who went to Tiff County down there in South Georgia years ago. So those three I have circled for different reasons. I think I dove into the data, Matt Green. Would you like to guess how many games Tennessee's slot receiver had over 100 yards receiving in 2024?
I would guess 0.
You would be correct. 0 games that the Tennessee slot receiver, whether it's Squirrel White, Chaz Nimrod, whoever, had over 100 yards receiving. That was a problem because I think what you've learned over the last 2 years is Tennessee has not gotten a lot of production out of the slot. Part of it was Squirrel was banged up this year, but I think this Heupel offense really needs the slot receiver to thrive. In 2021, it was Velus Jones, who was just a mismatch machine. If you remember against Georgia, like he was the one who scored early in that game. He was going to be in the backfield. He was kind of running back. He played a little running back.
I don't remember that at all.
Well, that it
what
did
year
happen.
Are you talking?
Are you being serious?
I don't remember Velus Jones making plays. I don't remember a Tennessee Georgia game being that close.
All right. Anyway,
no, I mean not even trash talking.
I'm saying in the first half, like, and Tennessee was leading after the first quarter in 2021. And that was our prediction on the pod. I
2021.
guaranteed Tennessee would be leading after the first quarter against Georgia, and I made that
that's
bet.
right. You're a big first quarter guy that year. Oh, that's right. That's true. And then Georgia had kind of the gut punch and took like a 2-touchdown lead. And
James Cook went off, I think, in the second quarter.
James Cook had that little corner fade right before halftime. That's right.
But all that to say, so Velus Jones was an All-SEC first-team player for the Vols in 2021 out of the slot. 2022, Jalen Hyatt had 5 games where he had over 100 yards receiving out of the slot for Tennessee. Velus Jones had 3 games where he had over 100 yards receiving in 2021. Tennessee was number 1 in scoring nationally in 22, and they were number 7 in 2021. Squirrel only caught 34 passes in the slot last year for Tennessee. Jones had 62 in 2021. Hyatt had 67 in 2022. I just don't think there's a way for Tennessee's passing game, which really struggled, 94th in conference play in passing, to get back on track, because everyone's looking at Mike Matthews, the former 5-star at the alumni at Parkview. He'll be on the outside. And look, he needs to be good. Like, he's going to be filling the Brew McCoy spot. But I think the slot position is more valuable in Heupel's scheme based on the 4 years that we've seen of Josh Heupel here at Tennessee. So Braylon Staley stepping in for Squirrel White in 25, I think is huge. So I've got my eye on him this spring to be like, what's the scuttlebutt on him? How is he performing as wide receiver 1 in that position? Is he a yak guy? Is he someone that looks like he can be the next difference maker in the slot for Tennessee? Because they have missed that greatly the last 2 years. He doesn't have to be Jalen Hyatt with the burner speed where he's just unguardable in space, but he needs to be a yak guy. He needs to be someone that can get open and be a safety valve for Nico that he did not have last year at the wide receiver position. So he's there. William Satterwhite, obvious one where Tennessee's replacing 4 starters in the offensive line next year. But Cooper May started as a redshirt freshman as a 4-star from Knoxville Catholic. William Satterwhite's got all the potential in the world. That would be huge for Tennessee if he can just settle right in and you've got another 4-year starter, above average, first-team All-SEC guy at center. Like, if he can develop into that, let him learn. But I'm excited about that one to see how he runs with it this spring. And then you also have Tyree West, where Tennessee really missed Tyler Barron. And Tennessee 2 years ago with Barron and James Pierce, they had 16 total sacks between the two of them. Tyler Barron was the strong side defensive end. Pierce, the Leo. Pierce had a lot less sacks this year. Part of it was just Tennessee did not have the dude, on the other side. They were rotating. They did the Moneyball thing where they let Tyler Barron go. He goes to Miami, has a good year, his final year with the Canes. And they tried to Moneyball it where they kind of replace him in the aggregate and they roll out Dominic Bailey, Jason Jenkins, and Tyree West. And they were okay, but it was not the same production pass rush wise as to what they had a year ago with Barron and Pierce. So I think Tyree West, now at a senior, I kind of need to see him have a big spring because I think you want him to start over Dominic Bailey at strong side defenseman. I think you really want one of these because Bailey's solid, but Bailey was the lowest graded pass rusher of anyone in that 3-man unit last year. He can't start. It just, you have to you have to move past him. You have to have one of these blue chippers surpass him. Like, it was kind of like Pierce surpassed Roman Harrison at a point where it's like, we like Roman Harrison, good guy, but like the Pierce talent, like it's just too much. Like he's got to play more snaps. He's just, you got to let the young guy overtake the older guy. And I just think for Tyree West, he's got the talent. He flashed against Chattanooga. He had a forced fumble. He played well early on. He just needs to put it all together. So I think this spring is big for him, his senior year. I want Tyree West to break out on that strong side defensive end spot because I think replacing Pierce on the other side, I don't think Tennessee is going to be able to get away with that side of the line of scrimmage not really doing a whole lot pass rush wise while you're relying on your Leos to get home on the other side. So I hope it's Tyree West, and I hope he's the one here that breaks through. But they got some guys coming in after, like Marion Dye and Isaiah Campbell in this class. Like Isaiah Campbell's a top 50 player. You have those guys, but they're freshmen. I just wouldn't count on them this year. The future's bright there, but Tennessee really needs to get home in big games, like you saw against Georgia and Ohio State, where that did not happen when they sent for Tyree West. I think is the best option to do that, and I hope he has a big spring to kind of build that hype train.
See, that's interesting that you say that. I was kind of getting the vibe that you and other Tennessee fans were it was kind of reminding me of Jalen Hyatt. It was interesting. You were talking about the slot position. I think there was confidence. It was like in Heupel's system, we'll find the next slot guy. Like Jalen Hyatt's good, but he's like a product of the system, will be good. And now, if a couple years have passed, you're like, oh shit, maybe we don't. Maybe it's harder to find one than we thought. It felt like that's kind of the vibe I was sensing of Tennessee fans of like James Pierce was good, but we'll be fine. And then he's kind of one of the guys who I wouldn't say he necessarily blew up at the combine because he was already like a projected top 10, 15 pick. But he definitely did himself some favors at the combine. So I'm curious if Tennessee fans are still feeling confident about still filling his shoes going into 2025.
I mean, it's like I said, I think it has to be a collective effort. I think they've got to blitz more than they did a year ago. I mean, I think Joshua Joseph's going to be really good. He had actually started off better than Pierce his freshman year. Like Joseph's burst on the scene before Pierce. They're in the same class. Joseph's will be a senior this year, and I think he could be a really good player. But you also have Jordan Ross, 5-star, who is kind of like that Pierce, just that kind of thing, that wiggle and that twitch that you just can't really teach, where Pierce is just his spin moves. And there's just stuff about Pierce where you're like, what do you do with this? Like, it's just, he's a natural pass rusher. I think Jordan Ross has that and could be that guy for Tennessee. So I think it's because I shouldn't say obvious. There is a realistic Pierce replacement in the rotation in 25 for Tennessee, whereas there was not a realistic Tyler Barron replacement a year ago. And there wasn't a realistic replacement for Jalen Hyatt the last 2 years because he's huge. Like Jalen Hyatt was huge and had just difference making speed. Squirrel, his size was a limitation. Like he was banged up a lot. And he was a good player. I mean, he had some big time catches for Tennessee. He had an all-timer against South Carolina, a gigantic one against on the road at Bama in 23. Like he had the 23 season, he was solid. Last year was a rough year for him, but they have to get more. Like he was a B- player at Tennessee, and you had 2 A's the first 2 years at slot in Vilas, and Vilas was probably an A, and then Hyatt's an A+. Like Hyatt's the
if he's winning the Bolitnikoff, I think that's about as high as it gets.
100%. And I think Braylon Staley, I hope it's him. Like I hope he's the guy who is the next potential star there, but he is a blue chipper and was highly regarded along with Mike Matthews. So, look, I think Mike's going to be a good player this year on the outside, filling in for Brew McCoy, but I think the slot position might be more important. So I think Braylon Staley needs to have a big spring and summer and really settle in. It's his show now. He's back, and so is Mike Matthews. So I hope they're both from South Carolina, so maybe there's that South Carolina magic in the slot for Tennessee.
Maybe. Little Palmetto magic.
Little Palmetto magic, Matt Green. Switching gears here. The rules. We haven't talked about this over the last couple weeks. Some potential rule changes in college football. Refresh the listener's memory here, because it's been a couple weeks here. What from the tweet from Chris Vanini of The Athletic, and what might be coming down the pike for college football?
Yeah, so I didn't necessarily have any issues, I don't think, with any of these rules. So yeah, the tweet from Chris Vanini, and these are just proposals, right? I don't think these have been approved yet. But essentially the Kirby Smart rule, the Georgia Tech game, you only get one total timeout for the third overtime, and beyond that, moving forward. I think even Georgia fans agree with this rule. It was ridiculous. Every single time they set up, Kirby was coming down there calling a timeout. The Dan Lanning rule of getting 12 guys on the field. The reason why that was such a big deal was because the clock in that situation, and so now the offense can if the defense has 12 players out for the play, 5-yard penalty plus offense can reset the clock. And so that makes a lot of sense now, because they legitimately kind of cheated. I don't know. I guess they were caught. They called a penalty, but it was definitely a loophole they found in the rule. And then I think the biggest one, which I don't think this will pass personally, is any injury after the ball is spotted will cost a timeout to discourage faking. Like, that's nice, but that's pretty extreme. I don't think, like, would you say every single time a guy goes down after the ball is spotted, it's definitely faking an injury?
Well, that's the whole thing. It's like, it's just going to be so hard to police this. Like, that's why it's like the instant replay. Like we can see it on instant replay where when they stand up and then they just fall down. Like it's just the instant replay you can tell, and it's like kind of like you need to stop the play where you need to do instant replay. Like they go in, the officials go in, and they hear from the booth and like what did the player do before he got injured and they came on. It's like, okay, he was standing up and looked fine and then just dropped. Or they could see like a coach telling him to drop, like motioning something or something like that, where it's like get down.
Well, and as someone who's been a referee, I mean, you do things like communicate with your other referees and give signals and stuff like that. So it's like if you just kind of have like a quick spot check, like nobody's down, okay, I'm spotting the ball.
Yeah.
Then, maybe it's an easy thing to be like, okay, now someone went down. Now we're gonna throw a flag for delay of game or whatever it is. But yeah, I mean, the fact that Georgia fans should be celebrating this rule, by the way, because you might as well do this against Georgia every time, even if it's legitimate, even if you're not faking injuries. I swear no team is more incapable of like maintaining momentum after like a stoppage. Like Georgia has a big play. Like you saw the Arian Smith one with the that walk-on that got in the way in the Notre Dame game. It seems like every time anything like that happens that slows down the momentum, it just like stalls a drive for Georgia.
I mean, I would just do. I don't even think you have to overcomplicate this. I would just have he can't play for the rest of the drive. Like that's it. Like I think this is very simple. If you go down in the drive, you're out for the drive. I think that's not too harsh. It's one of those where it's like, okay, if you're down, then you got to sit out the rest of this drive. Like I think that's fair. I think that's all we need. We don't need like you're out for the rest of the game. We have to throw like you lose a timeout or whatever. I think it's just you can't go back in. Like that player is gone for the rest of the drive.
But I think there's legitimate injuries where you can come back in that drive.
No,
we
got to do something, Matt Green.
We don't have that all-time great Stafford moment against the Browns if he can't do that. And he was able to come back in and throw with one arm.
You can't make this where it's like when your team benefits, then you're like, well, it doesn't apply when we benefit from this. You got to have something, man. You're not gonna appease everybody with this.
No, that's true. I think this would be a good rule personally, and maybe it's like a rule that only like you have to do for like 5 years, and then people stop faking injuries, and you kind of move away from it. Like I don't know, maybe you need to like start harsh, and then you can, because I think it is a problem in college football with the faking injuries. So, and if you shouldn't be punishing a player for having to like be out the rest of a drive or essentially doing what the coach told him to, like go down, but to penalize with a timeout, like that seems legitimate, and you will no longer do that in a strategic manner if you're losing a timeout for it. Like you're not even going to make it look close.
Okay.
So I think it's a good rule. I just question that it's going to pass.
Yeah, my gut is it will not. Right? Like that's until it's a see it to believe it kind of situation there, right?
Yeah, maybe it's a big enough issue that they want to do something about it. I definitely am in favor of it. That's the only one I see being controversial, because like taking a timeout away is a big deal. But the other two, like obviously the other one is taking timeouts away as well, but in a different fashion. Like the other two seem like obvious. Like anyone who's watching those games, like yeah, a team shouldn't get any sort of benefit from having 12 guys on the field. Just like a team, just from a spectator perspective, shouldn't be taking a timeout every single overtime. But if you have the timeouts, then you're foolish not to take a timeout every single overtime. How are they going to set up? Okay, let's defend it this way. So, can't knock the hustle for Kirby or Dan Lanning, but those seem like no-brainers.
That's fair. Matt Green, let's change gears here. You touched on this a little bit when we were talking SEC schedules in Georgia earlier. The toughest schedule in 2025 in the SEC is who, in your estimation? Because I already revealed who I think it is, but this is your call.
So I have a quick formula. I should have shared this with you on our shared drive. I have to keep my data secret from you. To get surprises from you. So tell me what you think about this criteria. These are the college football playoff contenders in the SEC next year. I got Georgia, Texas, Alabama, Tennessee, Ole Miss, South Carolina, Texas A&M, and LSU. those are like, what is that? I think that's 8 teams right there. I feel like those are the 8 teams that I think will be preseason top 15 to 20-ish. Florida or Auburn could jump in there, like be preseason ranked or something like that. But I feel like those teams, and maybe it's disrespectful, maybe Florida and Auburn are contenders as well, because that term is a little looser than it once was. But I feel like those top 8, can you kind of agree that those are the ones we kind of are going to be preseason top 15, 20, like those fan bases expect to make the playoff this year?
Expect to make the playoff? Are South Carolina fans expecting the playoff? Because that's wild.
I mean, expected as much as like this is their year. Like, if we're gonna make the playoff, like this is the year where we make the playoff. Like,
South Carolina is going to be last year. Like, a lot of things went right for South Carolina down the stretch last year. I don't know. Part of it might be like you may have missed it. I think Ole Miss and South Carolina. If I'm an Ole Miss or South Carolina fan, I'm a little nervous because I'm like,
no, that's definitely fair. But I mean, South Carolina finished what, like 12th, 13th? I mean, they lost. They were like I guess they weren't 12th. Obviously, it would have been the playoff. But they were like 13 or 14 and then lost the bowl game. So finished.
Like, Mizzou's got a better schedule. I would probably take out South Carolina and put Mizzou in.
Well, I mean, the schedule, yeah, we're getting in a whole nother thing. Missouri, no one thinks Missouri is going to be that good next year.
People thought Missouri. Do you remember the preseason love Missouri got last year? People had Missouri in the CFP over Tennessee.
But they had Brady Cook coming back. They had Luther Burden. Like, it felt like they had a lot of things working in their favor. But so basically, though, kind of my criteria was like, and maybe you want to include Missouri as another team, and that changes up the data. But using those 8 teams as like the contenders, I went down the entire SEC and just how many games each of those teams has versus one of the contenders, essentially. And I have 4 teams that have 6 or more of the contenders on their list, which is insane now that I think. Oh, no, because some of these have non-conference games, too. I'm like, wow, they're playing all of them? No, some of these have non-conference games. I think all of them have non-conference games that add to those schedules. But the 2 that have 7 are Florida and Oklahoma. And then the 2 that have 6 are Arkansas and Mississippi State. And so I know Arkansas has Notre Dame. Florida's got Miami. Oklahoma's got Michigan. And then Mississippi State, who do they have? Oh, I think they have Arizona State on their schedule. But yeah, so I think it's got to be someone in that Florida or Oklahoma, both with 7. It's just an absurd schedule they have in 2025.
I mean, it's probably Florida. I mean, it really is. And that's why I'm a Florida fan. And I'm actually kind of annoyed at just this whole year, is because you're like, you went all in, you went super heavy in the portal. You have a franchise quarterback in DJ Lagway you're really excited about. But I think Florida is the ultimate, like Josh Pate says this, your record is not you're not what your record says you are. And I think Florida is going to be that team in 25, where it's like Florida could be a lot better even than last year. And the schedule is just so brutal that it just doesn't matter. Like, Florida's schedule, I mean, they go to Miami this time. Like, they lost at home.
Which, whatever that means.
I mean, if Carson Beck is even like...
I guess Miami fans will show up for that game.
Well, I don't say it's still a road game, and it's against the team that you lost to last year. Florida State will be better this year, we think, than what they were.
Yeah, I'm not even counting Florida State in that at all.
Yeah. So the answer is Florida, but I still do think the people who pencil in Georgia, where I'm like, Georgia's schedule is brutal, because like, even though you're not going to Texas, you're not going to Bama this time. I mean, week 3, you're going to Tennessee, who's going to be a top 10 team, who's you share a 9.5. Like, Georgia plays the top 3. Like, Georgia, if you believe that they could win the SEC again and run the gauntlet, then you're also believing that they are going to be able to beat the 2 of the teams that they are tied with in their preseason win-loss total atop the conference. I think actually all 4 now are 9.5. I think Bama, depending on which sportsbook you look at, Bama, Tennessee, Texas, and Georgia, all at 9.5, depending on what you look at for Bama. But you get all of them on your schedule. So I think the difference is like Florida, yeah, their schedule sucks, but I don't think Florida was going to win the national title this year. I look at it a little bit differently in terms of like their Georgia schedule is brutal because of the contenders who can win it all. I look at this and I'm like, man, of Tennessee, Bama, Georgia, and Texas and Tennessee have got a really nice road again of making the CFP and winning double-digit games and finding their way back in. Georgia's going to have to earn it again. Like last year they had to earn it, But this year, I think they have to earn it again, and I think there's a path where it's tougher, even with some of those games at home now because of their win streak. Like, that helps things. But Tennessee will be a tougher game on the road. I would expect, we talked about Auburn. I think that will be a dogfight on the road.
But the main reason it's tougher is because you don't think this team is going to be as good as 2024.
Yeah,
so
I think it's possible.
I don't think there's any argument the schedule was tougher last year because like those Ole Miss was one of those teams. Like I think you're talking about like those four you named, Texas, Georgia, Tennessee, Alabama. Those are the 4 SEC teams I would guarantee are preseason top 10 next year. Texas is playing one of those, Georgia's playing all 3. Bama and Tennessee will both be playing 2 of them. But Ole Miss was another one of those teams last year, and Georgia was playing them too. And Texas was still only playing one of those games. So, and the fact that Texas, Alabama, and Ole Miss were all on the road, like that's a schedule I'm not sure we're ever going to see like that difficult again. So I just think, like you're saying, though, I do agree. This team, I just don't feel like is as right now in March. I don't feel as confident as the 2025 team as I did in March of 2024. So that's why I don't necessarily see it going any different. I think the games are going to be just as difficult as they were a year ago, even though the schedule might be slightly easier if Ole Miss kind of takes a step back. But like we talked about before, I actually have Georgia as 5 on this one, only 5 games. But like we said before, that's not including Florida and Auburn. And so Georgia has those 5 games, and maybe Florida or Auburn or maybe even Georgia Tech, like we said before, maybe they're one of a contender as well. Because that was the other thing in Georgia's schedule last year was Clemson in the opener. So it was just from start to finish, it was just a brutal schedule. And man, I don't know how many games Georgia had decided by 1 score last year, but it had to be the most of like the Kirby Smart era, I would think. At least since 2017.
And then, I mean, to put a bow on it, it's like, poor Brent Venables, man. Like, they go all out. They hire Ben Arbuckle. They bring in John Mateer. But, like, that schedule is just, like, when you have whispers of, like, it's a make or break year for Brent Venables, and you're like, I just don't like this idea. And it goes for Napier, too. It's like, you either believe that he's your guy or he's not. Like, because if you just look at it year-to-year results and you're like, well, he's got to break through this year. And I'm like, well, what if his schedule is a whole lot better in 26 and he just survives and goes 7-5, 8-4, or whatever? Like, is that still going to be like, oh, we needed 9-3, 10-2 for him to really show? It's like, well, schedules aren't going to be the same every year. Like, you might have a much better road next year. Ben Arbuckle might be a legitimate star young OC, kind of in that Lincoln Riley vein that you just brought in, and things are trending in the right direction. But like, you either believe in the guy or you don't. And I just hate these made up rules where it's like, oh, he's got to win these final 3. It's like you saw with, we talked Georgia basketball where they made that mistake where Dennis Felton won a lot down the stretch that year. And they're like, oh, we're not going to fire Dennis Felton
now.
Yeah. And then Kevin Keats last year, final 4 run for NC State. He just got fired today, Matt Green. They had an awful year after this year. So, I mean, you look at it like, he's either your guy or he's not. You can't just look at it like, oh, well, he did make that final, but it's like, Gene Chizik. It's like, oh, Gene Chizik, he won a national title. How do we ever move on? It's like, well, because it was getting worse.
He never won one. He got to one.
No, Gene Chizik won. They went undefeated with Gene Chizik.
Oh, I was thinking Malzahn. Yeah, you're right. You're right.
Where you're like, he won. And it's like, how do we fire the guy who won a national title? Well, it's because it's getting worse.
I don't know. It didn't take them that long to fire Chizik, though, did it?
He got 2 years after, I think.
Yeah.
But it just goes back to like
2 years.
Yeah, but it's just my whole thing is like he either is the guy or he's not. Like you either believe it, and like sometimes crazy results can happen. A Final Four appearance randomly, a national title in the extreme circumstances. But I don't know. My whole thing is like Brent Venables is kind of in a really crappy situation. That's all I'm saying.
No, I think that's fair. And you were saying Missouri was you were kind of arguing for them being a contender. Like Missouri's also on Oklahoma's schedule, so like I'm not even including Missouri there. So. You do get a lot of
Missouri's schedule, Matt Green. Look at this. Central Arkansas, Kansas at home, Louisiana, South Carolina at home, UMass at home. They don't go on the road until October 11th, Matt Green.
Wait, who are you looking at?
Mizzou.
Oh, you're looking at Mizzou.
They don't go on the road until October.
That's wild.
Like this schedule, you get A&M at home. They got to go to Auburn, to Vandy, to Oklahoma, to Arkansas. But like this is a 10-2 schedule to even a decent. This is a much, for all the crap that Tennessee and Texas are getting, Mizzou's schedule in 25 is, I mean, unbelievable.
Yeah, that's the other side of this. I can highlight the teams. I had 5 teams that have 3 or less contenders on their schedule for next year, kind of how we're looking at it in March. And Auburn, Ole Miss, Missouri, and Texas all had 3. Tennessee Volunteers with 2. 2 contenders on their schedule. I mean, it's potentially 2 top 5 teams, and maybe the 2 best programs in college football in recent years. But that's pretty much what Tennessee's got this year. It's Georgia and Alabama. If they can split one of those, I mean, I think this team could easily go 11-1. But obviously,
don't forget at Florida.
Yeah, exactly. And then you talk about Florida, kind of how we consider them, and maybe Oklahoma's better. Who knows what happens with that. But that Tennessee's schedule is definitely built for them to get the college football playoff as well.
There's a reason they're at the top of the SEC in preseason win-loss total. Part of it's they are bringing a lot back, but the other part of it is it's a really nice schedule. Like it's a really nice 9.5, 10-win schedule.
Yeah, and the one team we haven't really talked about is Ole Miss, because I think this is a really interesting year for Ole Miss, because like last year I think was Ole Miss's chance to win a national championship. Like in terms of like what the teams we saw play in the college football playoff, there were very few teams I saw play in the college football playoff who looked as good as Ole Miss did at their best last season. You know what I mean? And Ole Miss just choked it away and lost games they shouldn't have lost. They won the big games they were supposed to win, or that they needed to win to get to that next step, and they lost the ones they were just that should have been easy wins. So I'm really curious with another kind of favorable schedule. Obviously going on the road in Athens is going to be a tough game, but I've said it before. I've never seen Georgia get dominated in a game the way Ole Miss dominated them in 2024. Honestly, until Ole Miss year 1 of Kirby Smart in 2016 was probably one of the more lopsided games we've ever seen for a Kirby Smart team. So that'll be interesting. But yeah, Ole Miss has some question marks after what they lost a year ago.
Absolutely. Matt Green, let's change gears here. Program report. We talk about Oklahoma. Who is trending up and trending down here when it comes to Oklahoma? Is this a program on the rise, or do you think they're trending down? Because there's been a lot of talk like, oh, Texas came in and they were ready for the SEC, and Oklahoma came in and they weren't ready. And I'm like, part of that is Texas. Yeah, they've recruited really well. Texas is a lot different than who they were 5 years ago. It's also like Texas had a really nice schedule last year, and they walked into that, and Oklahoma had a murderer's row schedule walking into 24 in the SEC. And I'm curious what Texas would have done against Oklahoma's schedule in 24 and how they would have looked. But they also had a not SEC ready offensive line, which was a huge issue for Oklahoma in 24. Like that was a disaster for them. And also they got destroyed by injuries. Like part of it, Oklahoma receivers, they were comically injured last year at Oklahoma. So I think there's a lot of reasons as to why Oklahoma spun off the rails last year, but they also beat Alabama at home. So they're kind of hard to get a good feel for. Matt Green, what say you though, going into a pivotal year for Brent Venables? Do you think this is a program on the rise or on the decline?
Yeah, I almost forgot about that win over Alabama. That was one of the more bizarre results of the entire season, honestly. I don't know. Venables been there 3 years, 6-7, 10-3, 6-7. I'm not sure. I would have to say they're on the decline.
I don't know. It's like you said, you talked about like schedules. They have a Florida S schedule. It's brutal, but he's like doing things that like, I just think last year they got so destroyed with Nick Anderson and company all going down. Jackson Arnold didn't work out. I mean, you still signed a 5-star. He didn't work out. He imploded, but you also like made quick changes. Like Brent Venables' defense was one of the best defenses in college football. They gave Jalen Milroe and Alabama's offense all kinds of problems. They gave Tennessee problems when Tennessee was in Norman. Tennessee was lucky to escape. I mean, they basically went into just grind it out after the first half, where Tennessee was like, our offensive line can't hold up here. Let's just run this out and get out of here with the dub. the defense is there. Like Brent Venables' defense is still working. Like that's the whole thing too that makes this complicated. Is I think the offense obviously was a disaster last year. The defense kept him in a lot of games. Like Oklahoma's defense was still one of the best in the SEC a year ago. And Ben Arbuckle, like he goes out and gets, I mean, is that kid even 30? The Wazoo OC for the last couple of years, he's been fantastic. Like if you go in and get this guy who coached Cam Ward up, and you get John Mateer, the number one quarterback in the portal, I mean, to me on the outside, it's like he's pressing the right buttons. Like I think you could explain away why last year was rough for them in the SEC. And I also just think the schedule is so bad, it's going to be really hard for them to get a fair assessment on where this program is. Because I think they could be better in 25, and the record might be close to what it was last year. So I don't know. I'm still mixed. I think Venables is still one of the best defensive coordinators in the sport. I think he hasn't lost a step there. I think he's shown that he is willing to make hard decisions on offensive guys like Seth Luttrell, who's now an analyst at Tennessee. He was the OC last year. They fire him. He lost Jeff Lebby early on. Like that was tough. He loses him early. Like what would it look like if he had that continuity at OC for a couple of years at Oklahoma? But he goes out and hires like the young stud and Ben Arbuckle, and he goes out and invests in the portal at quarterback. Like I don't know. I don't really have a lot of issues with how Venables and Oklahoma is operating right now. I just feel like their schedule sucks. They got killed by injuries last year, and they need some continuity on the offensive side of the ball. Like, I don't know. They also need to recruit the offensive line better, and they have this cycle, a couple 5-stars, I think, on their offensive line. So, I don't know.
No, I think that's fair. I think John Mateer is an ultimate X factor. Like, if you're getting one of the best quarterbacks in the country, according to the transfer portal rankings, I'm not going to pretend I watched a lot of Washington State games a year ago, but yeah, I mean that's a huge step forward. And like I said, I almost forget about that Alabama game even happened, but Alabama put up some big point totals against some other good teams last year, and that offense did nothing against Oklahoma. So, like you said, Venables has forgotten more about defense than most people even know. So I tend to trust him there. It's interesting how like the expectations are going to kind of be recalibrated in this playoff era because, while there's going to be more, understanding of maybe those top coaches that don't win championships, it's like, oh, no championships, but he had 2 playoff appearances in the last 5 years. Like there's some sort of tangible accomplishments. It also kind of provides a kind of a benchmark for some of those lesser programs. And it's like, hey, you've been in Oklahoma here, not saying calling Oklahoma a lesser program, but it's like, you've been at Oklahoma like 5 years now, no playoff appearances, we're going to have to cut you. I think, with these tougher schedules, like some of these coaches need to be given the benefit of the doubt, but with that 12-team format, and maybe it's more, I don't know that they're going to get a lot of leeway if you're at a big time program who's supposed to be a contender and you don't have any playoff appearances. Like to your point, like I don't mean to make everything about Georgia, but Texas, like we saw how flawed of a Georgia was a year ago, played so many close games, lost more games last year than they've lost, in one season in the whole Kirby Smart era. And Texas lost that team twice and basically didn't play another team that good the whole season. Like if Texas is playing this Oklahoma schedule, also should have lost to Arizona State, a team most people didn't even respect to be in the playoff. If they're playing Oklahoma's schedule last year, they might lose 3 or 4 games. Like I still don't know how good the 2024 Texas team was. So now you have a second consecutive year of Oklahoma's just going to play a gauntlet and Texas is going to have this super easy schedule. It doesn't help that Texas absolutely blasted Oklahoma last year. So it's not like you have an argument that you're better than Texas or anything. But those schedules that they had to face being welcomed in the SEC were very different.
I mean, in games that Oklahoma won last year, in the 6 games, they only allowed 12 points a game, good for 4th in the SEC. Down the stretch, they were 6th in scoring defense in November. They got better. Like they were near the bottom in the middle point of the year. But I mean, I think Oklahoma was solid. I just think that defense was solid, and I think it's why I just think he's in a tough spot. I think they very much could be better next year, and it doesn't matter because I don't think the wins will be there with this schedule. I mean, you would love to get Tennessee at home this year, because Mateer is the kind of quarterback that would give Tennessee fits. Tennessee struggled, obviously, on the road in Norman last year. Having to come here, it's going to be a different animal. And Tennessee just doesn't really lose at home under Heupel outside of the Georgia game. So I don't know. I think that's a tough one for Oklahoma to draw Tennessee on the road this year versus last year. But I don't know. I think Oklahoma could be 6-6, 7-5 again, and the narrative is going to be, oh, it's just not working. And I think you and I could be on this program talking about it. We're like, well, they're in these big games. Like, they're not getting blown out. Like, they're showing fight here. Mateer's solid. The offense is getting better, but they're also playing really good teams that are they're supposed to lose. Like, Oklahoma could lose a bunch of games they're favored to lose, and people are like, what happened? And that's what annoys me is like, oh, he's got to go. It's not the answer. It's like, well, they weren't favored in these games. Like, what do you want them to do?
That's true. And that's why so much of it is about, just how it feels.
Yeah.
Like, because Florida a year ago was 7-5, and it's like, to get to 7-5, you had to win a couple games you weren't supposed to win. They beat LSU and Ole Miss. And then you kept Georgia close. You took Tennessee to overtime. Like, the A&M one was the one that was like ugly, and Miami beat them pretty handedly too, right?
Mm-hmm.
If I remember right. So
Miami
those were
them
early. So it felt like, okay, this team's going to give up on Billy Napier after those two losses. I think both of those were in September.
Mm-hmm.
A&M was definitely early. But yeah, and then they, if you have such a tough schedule, it's a double-edged sword. Obviously, I'm not using that expression correctly, but you obviously have a lot of opportunities to lose games, but you also have a lot of opportunities to have those big wins that the fans remember. And I think that there is some value to that. And so Oklahoma has some of those games versus big time teams. Maybe you keep some of them close, maybe you win a couple. And we were talking about with the recalibrating expectations, the more this starts to feel like the NFL and playing like these big time schedules, you can lose a couple more games, but if you're Oklahoma and you're finishing in the bottom half of the SEC, that's never going to be good enough at a program like Oklahoma.
That's fair.
And I tend to think every coach should be given 4 years. Like, just obviously the portal and stuff has changed things, and guys can last 5-6 years now. But maybe after COVID, we're done with all that. But I tend to think a guy should get 4 years. So if you go 4 years and 3 of them are 6 and 7, you're Oklahoma. You're expecting better than that. Obviously, it's tougher now in the SEC, but you're still one of the blue blood programs of college football.
I would just look at this year, no matter what, for Napier and Venables. Unless you go 4-8, 3-9, if you get to 6-6 or better, and then I think you run it back one more year. I think you just look at it as our schedule is going to be a whole lot better in 26, and that's when it really comes down to okay, where are we at? That's when it needs to flip, because I just think that for these two schools in particular, this year is just unwinnable. And then it just Arkansas is just in no man's land, where they're just their schedule's brutal, and they're just all back, and we didn't assume. I think that's very rational what you're saying, and I think with Oklahoma, you could definitely make that argument. I mean, maybe you feel like John Mateer, if John Mateer is the real deal, kind of, if he's Cam Ward, who was the best quarterback in the portal a year ago, right? If he's Cam Ward and you go 6 and 7. It's okay, this is a problem. We had a big time quarterback and you wasted it. It's it feels like Oklahoma is a little more understanding. Florida's honestly kind of got this tough position they're in now, is they're getting hype. They're getting a little preseason hype. And now it's if this team doesn't win 8, 9, 10 games, it might be looked at as a disappointment, even though the schedule is absolutely brutal. If DJ Lagway doesn't take the next step, he's just a sophomore. So maybe that's the advantage Florida has, is if they win 7 games, but DJ Lagway looks great, then you're thinking DJ Lagway is the potential number 1 overall pick going into his junior year. That's 26 is the year we're winning a national championship. And maybe that's how you feel, even though you're coming off another kind of mediocre year win-loss wise. But I don't know if Oklahoma has that same kind of build on 2025 to go into 2026 if Mateer is just a one year rental guy. True. I also don't love the way to analyze the schedule. I think Oklahoma, what would worry me if I'm Brent Venables is you open with Michigan and Auburn at home, like there's a chance where Oklahoma could be 5-0 going into the Texas game, but Texas at South Carolina, Ole Miss at home, at Tennessee, at Alabama, Mizzou at home, LSU at home. Like, I could just see them stacking up wins in the first half of the year and taking advantage of some home games with Mateer getting settled in and teams not being ready for the Arbuckle Mateer experience at Oklahoma, and then the schedule getting tougher and them floundering down the stretch. But losing to good teams. Like, there's no shame in losing at Bama, at Tennessee, at South Carolina in 2025. But I think optics-wise, it will look like things fell apart down the stretch for Venables. He had this hot start where, they were 5-0, and then they lost to Texas, and the bottom came out. It's like, well, they won games they were supposed to win in the first half, and then they got their second half. Their schedule was really imbalanced. So I think that would scare me a little, is that this has all the makings of just disappointment down the stretch, and that's when coaches get fired, right? Is like, nobody remembers the first half of the year, even if you have a great start. But if your schedule is brutal and you lose games in big primetime moments to some big games, it looks like, he went 1-5 down the stretch or whatever. It's like, you got to go. We're trending the wrong way. It's like, are you, or you just, the schedule was uneven?
I think that's fair. I think you can justify it when the schedule is so brutal. I think starting, like, losing to Michigan and Auburn and starting 3-2 or something, then going into that brutal stretch.
Yeah, that's rough.
That's when you're done. But I think you we started 4-0. Like, what do you mean? Our schedule's brutal. Like, yeah, maybe that could be the case. But
what are you thinking putting Michigan there? Like, why are you bringing Michigan in? Like, what are we doing?
It's college football, man. I love it. I want everyone playing these games. I'm all for it. I can't talk shit about Oklahoma scheduling on Michigan. So that's gonna be massive though, because Michigan was not very good a year ago. So that could be one that's, a 21-20 game or something like that, and it turns out you beat the best team in the Big Ten, or you barely beat another 7-5 team or something like that. Like, I really have no idea what Michigan's going to be next year.
Well, you might have Mikey King at that point, right? Like, they might not roll out Bryce Underwood first couple weeks. You might avoid the number one overall player in the class. He might not be day one starter. I don't know.
And you do get them at home, and you get Auburn at home, so you don't have to go on the road. And Texas is the neutral site, so you don't have to go on the road against an SEC team until October 18th at South Carolina. So
yeah,
that's good and bad. You're going to be completely. John Mateer will never see anything. Has never seen anything like what he's going to see in Williams-Brice Stadium out there on the West Coast.
Well, that's all I've got, Matt Green. Anything else you want to throw out here before we wrap up here on this Sunday night edition of A Pod Divided?
That's all I got, man. I guess next time we talk will be Selection Sunday, so we'll be able to see where all these SC basketball teams end up in the tourney. I'm excited for it. It's been a while since I even thought about Georgia in the NCAA tournament. I think there was I want to say there was like a chance, like if they made a run with Anthony Edwards the COVID year, that like they were a bubble team, but obviously tournament got canceled and all that never happened. But yeah, it's been since like the JJ Frazier year since the team was even a contender, like what, 2017, 2018?
Yeah. Well, we'll see how it goes. Dogs finish strong down the stretch. Tennessee, obviously beating South Carolina on Saturday night, and we'll see what they do here in the tournament with their double bye, and if they go for it with A&M and company likely ahead of the.
No question, sir. They're going for it. Tennessee's gonna try to win.
I'm letting A&M have the dub. I'm getting out of there. Get me out of there on Friday.
Rick Barnes, Rick Barnes has to stack up these accomplishments because he's not going to make the Final Four. So he's gotta.
Matt Green, always a pleasure, and I'll talk to you next week.
Yes, sir.
All right, we're back here on the Chase Thomas podcast, where I'm now joined by a first-timer. He's decked out. You don't have to wonder about where this guy coaches high school football at here in East Tennessee. It's Eddie Spradlin. Eddie, good morning, sir. How are you?
Good, man. Thanks for having me. Always a special occasion to get to talk about the Green Devils. Looking forward to it.
I mean, you have spring practice starting for the Vols here this morning. Are you getting the itch here? I know
Yeah,
it's
for
cold, so
sure.
does it feel like it?
I went a couple of weeks ago and went and watched UTC practice. ETSU is starting up, planning to go watch them practice next week. I'll go down there and watch Tennessee practice. So exciting time of the year. One of my coaches is on the road, and he's been to a couple different practices the past week. So it's an exciting time.
What is your off season like? Is it going to coaching clinics, learning stuff, just trying to be in the lab, like a lot of film work? What is your off season like?
Yeah, kind of in off season for me, I kind of put on a different hat because I'm privileged at Greeneville High School to have all my football kids, well, the majority of them are in a weightlifting class during the day, and that's a class that I'm teaching. So during the season, there's another coach that's in there with me during the day, so he handles a majority of that stuff. But during the off season, it's all on me during that class. So put a new hat on, and during the day, it's just getting after it and grinding in the weight room with those guys and trying to get stronger. But then we'll get ready for spring practice, and I've got all my kids in a weightlifting for the most part, so we're getting all that in. But after school, a lot of the head coaching responsibilities, you try to take those on after school hours, just so I'm focused on those kids, giving them their best during that time that I've got during the day.
Are you lifting with them, or are those days behind you, Eddie?
No, I'm not going. I'm trying to keep the energy up, and I'm the rah guy that leading the workout. So there's no time for me to be lifting. From one guy to the next. We probably got close to 60 kids in there at one time. So it's a lot of energy in there, and somebody's got to be the bus driver. So it's got to be me while I'm in there. So I'm not getting any lift while those guys are in there.
What music preferences do you do? Do
I
you let
let
the
those
kids
guys
control it, or are you controlling the auxiliary cord here?
I let those guys control that music as long as it's something that's going to get them going, and it's got to be pretty clean in there as well. So you know how music is nowadays. It's hard to find something that's don't get too a little wild in there. So right now my quarterback he runs the Caden Ball. He runs the majority of the music for us.
Okay, I love it. Anything else you've done? Any travels? Anything else you've kind of like emphasized here this off season, getting ready for next year?
I try to do a lot of self-study during that time. We've done I'm obviously head coach, but I also take on the role as a defense coordinator. So we've done a lot of self-study with the defense, and we've met quite a few times talking about things. Our coaches get together. I've went to a couple different coaching stuff. Clint Bearden had one a couple of weeks ago, and they talked about it, a lot of offensive stuff. So I'm always trying to anything that you can pick up. Obviously not going to go to clinics and say, oh, this is how we're going to do things. But you can always pick up, just little things that can help improve. So try to do that during the off season as well.
How much has changed from the first day with you becoming the head coach at Greeneville to now in terms of your philosophy? Is not much change, or has it gradually shifted over the years?
I think we've been successful. I've been had the privilege to be here since 2007. I've worked under 3 head coaches. For the most part, majority of my 10-year career was spent with Coach Kane Ballard. We won 4 state championships during that time. We competed for got beaten the state championship one time as well. So learned a ton from him. But we've been successful really just because of the hard work we put in as a program. It really starts with what we do in the weight room. We were able to get those guys in the weight room, and they're able to be consistent with that. We're don't want to say it's year long, but more or less it's year long. You got a couple of weeks off after football season ends, whenever that might be. Then you got a couple of weeks off at Christmas. But other than that, like I said, I've got those guys in a class during the year, and we're in there, 4 or 5 times a week doing something from, strength conditioning to speed development. And so it's a full-time gig in there, and it's, that's the reason why we've been successful. But, when you take on the head coach, you obviously learn a lot of different things that you thought you knew before when you were assistant. But, I continue to learn. this game's always changing. If you're not trying to be out there being in the front of it, this game will leave you behind. So you're always trying to pick up something new. But at the end of the day, it comes back to just working hard, commitment, and really loving on those guys. At the end of the day, everybody wants to win a dang championship, but if you're not trying to make a difference in those guys, you're not going to be successful. I'm not going to be remembered as how many region championships, how many state championships I won. All that. Everybody forgets about that stuff. Your opportunity to make a difference in 60 or 70, 80 kids every year. If you're not making the most of that, you're failing your program, your school, and your community.
I love that. Last year, Anderson County, at the very end here, Eddie, when you look at just like y'all's schedule, what's interesting is just like the high-powered offense, just high-powered week over week. From the Alcoa game on, you were rolling. And then Anderson County, who had a really good year, 14 points. What happened there when you go back and look at the tape and like in terms of offensively, like it was a close game, 28-14. What did you see on film now that you've been a couple of months away from it where you're like, man, if we had done this, or maybe that Anderson County did this that we weren't expecting as well, or did the game honestly just go kind of the way you expected in your film work getting ready for it?
I knew it was going to be a 4-quarter battle. They got a cheap touchdown there at the end. It was 14-7 us at halftime. We score coming out of the half and go up 21-7 and get a penalty for a receiver not being on the line of scrimmage. And so we had an opportunity to start the second half being up 21-7. But, if you look back from when both those programs play each other, it's going to be a 4-quarter battle that's two of the best football teams in 4A, without a doubt, beating up on each other. So really good game. When it was a 4-quarter game, I lost a Division I receiver in the first quarter of that game. That's our big time playmaker out there on the edge. He's also starting corner. So they were able to take advantage of some of that. So, big time games like that, a kid that you expect to make big plays for you is not playing, it makes a big difference. But, really proud of my kids' effort. They battled for 4 quarters and we didn't come on top on that game, but a really good, hats off to Anderson County, top-notch programs, got really good kids year in, year out. But, when those two teams play, it's going to be a big-time battle.
When you think back to the season as a whole in 2024, which game, when you look at how the game ultimately unfolded versus your game week prep, went completely different than what you expected? What was that one game for you?
I think probably game 2 against Dobbins Bennett. You're playing 6A Dobbins Bennett, and they had beat Farragut the week 1. Really talented football team. Come in here and we were able to, we knew it was going to be a dang battle, but we were able to really take advantage of that game plan. And we beat them 35-0. I thought it was going to be more of a 4-quarter game. In that one, I had if you look back, we beat Tennessee High, another 5A school. We beat them, I think it was 60-7 game 1. We got some administration stuff didn't get taken care of how I was told it was from the school's part, and we had to forfeit that game. That starting line, that kid didn't play the next game, and so we were down a linebacker in that game. We had another injury in that game. Just some young kids stepped up in that game that really wasn't in the game plan, and we were able to come out on top against a really good football team who ended up winning that region in 6A.
Who was the most overlooked player that you're just like, when you put up like just game in, game out, you were just like, the fans in attendance don't really see what he was able to do for your team in 24? Who was that kind of overlooked guy for y'all?
If you, it's probably going to be an offensive or defensive lineman, just because, we're able to run the football. When you talk about what we did, you're going to talk about Zayden Anderson on offense, Carson Quillen, who was Mr. Football finalist. Caden Ball did a really good job. We had a couple young receivers in there that were probably didn't get enough attention just because how hard they played and the blocking they did. There were some sophomores. Defensively, Drew Armbrister had a tremendous year at linebacker, all-state kid. C.J. Reyes, another kid who was a defensive guy. But at the end of the day, you got kids like Brandon Iezzi, was all-state offensive lineman. A lot of people didn't talk about him, but, at the end of the year, he got a lot of, postseason awards. But he's a guy that just kept on. You could pin on him to play both ways. Zorian Harris is another kid that really stepped up this year that did a really good job for us on offensive line. But, a lot of unsung heroes on that offensive line that don't get a lot of attention. It ain't a fun position to play, especially fun to practice. You're always beating up on each other, but it's if you've not got a big time offensive line or defensive line, it's hard to be successful at the level that we play in, and really the offseason or the out of region opponents that we have to pick up and play each year because just to get games.
Do you think it's harder to coach offensive line now than it was 20 years ago? Just because I wonder, because the Leo position is so it's so different than what it was, and the guys coming off the edge and the athleticism in most defenses front sevens is completely different. Where you have guys who would have been safeties 20 years ago are now linebackers for a lot of teams. Is it harder to coach offensive line in high school football these days, or do you think it's maybe easier? What do you think about that?
I think how we're going to do it's pretty similar. I've got an old school offensive line coach that was played at Appalachian State, and he's old school from North Carolina, and he's just tough, and he really pushes those kids hard. But like you said, the game's changed. You turn on any Saturday football or really turn on Friday night. Any game on Friday night, it's not a big old fat guys that used to play offensive line like it used to be. Everybody's athletic. If you want to be successful and contribute, you're gonna have to be in shape. And you turn back, 20 years ago, high school guys, there are a lot of kids that are unathletic could have a chance to be successful on just because they're big and getting away because you're under center running I formation. The whole we're a zone team. Those linemen got to be able to move and, got to get on the second level. And we throw screens out on the edge. So you got to be big and athletic. And but at the same time, you got to be tough. And, that's what, as a team, we got a big 5-man sled that the whole team pushes at least once a week together just to try to get that toughness, the old school, what it takes to be successful as an offensive lineman.
I mean, I went to Parkview. I don't know if you're familiar in high school in Georgia, the Lilburn area, and they won 3 straight in the early 2000s under Flo with Jeff Rancour and company. And there was Zeb McKenzie, the Matt Stinchcomb days, and those dudes. I mean, it's just kind of wild. If you look at some 2001 tape of Parkview's offensive line versus what it was, I mean, just a couple of years ago. With Mike Matthews, 5-star kid on the perimeter, and Joey Sturdivant was actually the coach at the time who played on those state title teams. It looks like a completely different sport, Eddie. Like I imagine it's got to be weird for you to like watch some old Greeneville stuff and be like, goodness, that's what we used to look like, and now it's completely different worlds.
Yeah, I've seen some, I don't know if you know the name Dustin Moore. He played at Greeneville. In probably the 90s. He played at Tennessee as well. Had some, was in some camps in the NFL. He played running back. He ended up playing tight end at Tennessee, but played running back in high school. He was 6'4", 6'5", 225, 35 pounds as a high school running back when it was under, just turn it and toss it to him.
Yeah.
I've seen some of those films, just how, different, the game is, those guys like that. And, those guys will still be successful now, but, it's just a lot different. Nobody, if you try to ask a quarterback to go in under there and take a snap from a center, it don't happen. They don't do it in little league. They don't do it in middle school. And that's something you really got to, if you're going to do that in your offense, you've got to really practice it a lot. Everybody wants to get under center in short yardage situations, but you do it a lot of times. What's happening to thumbing the dang football? So, just how the game's changed, everything, snapping it from, in shotgun and everything. But, it's exciting football. This, the fans love it. 20, 30 years ago, it was about being physical and just beating each other up. It still is, but it's a little different style now.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm a big NFL guy too, and like you see kind of the Niners, and one of the things I thought was interesting, I mean, Tennessee did this too this past year, is like one of the things that made San Francisco so tough to beat during their dynasty before this bad year they just had was I think they leaned into the just tackling has kind of nosedived over the years where they're like, what if we just had a bunch of guys who are hard and a pain in the butt to tackle with Debo, Christian McCaffrey. You just have guys. I mean, they're still running fullback with Kyle Juszczyk, and like they're banking on you not wanting the contact, and guys were tackling. They just don't have as much practice time going towards tackling. Tackling is just, I don't think, what it was 20 years ago. So I think we are maybe seeing a little bit of a return to physicality with some teams where they are prioritizing guys who are just bigger, faster, and stronger, who, I mean, are just quite honestly just harder to tackle, and they're banking on those guys. And I think we're kind of seeing that a little bit because we've gotten so finesse in football that some teams are taking advantage of just that whole, we're going to beat you with speed and space and beat you on the perimeter. It's like, well, what if you don't have the dudes to match up with? We'll just run the ball down your throats because we know you're not going to be able to tackle, and we're going to get 5 to 6 yards a pop. And I think you're seeing different things. That's one of the great things about high school football is like, I mean, you're still seeing some wing tee stuff. Pigeon Forge is out here running the wing tee still, and it depends on where you look, and everyone's still running different kind of stuff, which is fun, right? Like I imagine it's a little bit more complicated for you if like, all right, here comes Gibbs with their style, and then we got another team who's running the air raid. I think Carter has done that in the past, so it's just you get a very, very different kind of look still week over week.
It's you don't get to recruit your guys in most cases, so you got to whatever fits your scheme and what you got year in, year out, gives you the best opportunity to be successful. You got to take advantage of it. And we've been blessed with some really good skill kids, some good quarterbacks that can run the football. So we've been able to be successful in, running the zone stuff. But like you said, you're going to see different stuff from week to week. Like we play during the regular season, we're playing, to be successful in high school, you better be able to run the football for the most part. So that, that's what we see in our region for the most part. But then you get to, like you said, Carter come out here and they're going to throw it every down. You don't see that, and it's hard to prepare for that. It's you try to do it during the practice during the year, but you're not seeing people just air it out like that as much. And when you do, it's a real big difference. There's an adjustment period for sure.
Yeah, high school is the only sport where you might play the Navy offense one week and then play Mississippi State's the next week, and it's just like it's a very, very different deal. Alcoa moving up to 4A. What do you think about? I mean, Greeneville, one of the best football programs in East Tennessee here for a long time. Alcoa, obviously, with their title history. Has that just crossed your mind when you're thinking about it? Like, what a battle! Like, does it excite you where it kind of gets you up? You're like, all right, Alcoa's here. Like, is that kind of how you are competitive wise?
If you want to be the best program, you're gonna have to compete against the best. And we've played them the past 2 years, a non-region game, just because in East Tennessee right now they're the measuring stick for anybody. So you want to be against them. We played 2 years ago and it was a 7-7 tie at halftime, and then we had that lightning storm and all that other stuff. And then we go down there and we play them. It's 14-13 at halftime this past year, and then Eli Graff took off in the second half and makes some really good plays. What a special player he is, and Coach Nix does a great job there. But if you want to be the top-notch program, you're gonna have to compete against those. But right now, if you talk about 4A football, it's got to be one of the toughest classes out there, because you got Alcoa, Greeneville, Anderson County, Elizabeth, and Upperman's really came on. Macon County's really been good. Pearl Cones came up to 4A. So 4A is a really tough division to be in. But at the end of the day, they're coming in from 3A, but Alcoa is going to be the measuring stick. And you're going to have to play. If you want to play for that gold ball, you're going to have to play them at some point. So, a lot of different – I don't know if you've seen where the playoff system's going to change a little, but Region 1, Region 2 still going to meet in the third round. So, you got an opportunity. You're going to have to face them during the third round if you're the region champs. And, first and foremost, we want to be region champs. That's our ultimate goal year in, year out, to set you up for your best chance to be successful in the playoffs. But if you get the opportunity to play them in the third round, that's going to be an exciting game for sure. Just like it was, like last year, it's us in Anderson County. You throw them, Alcoa, in that mix. It's going to be some dang battles for some good regular season high school games.
Do you like the change? Because I understand like the what they're thinking of, just avoiding rematches, right? Like that's the main thing, is to avoid rematches. But I've heard and read on the opposite side of like just the travel implications of avoiding rematches and kind of the change. Like, which way do you lean? Do you just kind of want to wait and see how it plays out before like really having a strong opinion on it, or do you feel one type of way more than the other right now?
To be honest, you've done something for the same. Every year you're playing the same teams in the playoffs, and you're playing. We might be, us in Anderson County might have been the best two teams for every year, but we're beating each other up in the third round every year. Yeah. I know they had some guys beat up when they played in the quarters this past year when we played, or in the semis. Year before, I had some quality dudes missing in that semifinal game because you're just beating each other up. It'd be fun to play each other in a semifinal game. If it was up to me, I'd love to see that. At one point we had I think it's called the Z plan or something like that, where everybody, you got seeded 1 to 16 from, you still got an East and West, but you're 1 to 16, and you got the trying to get the best teams playing in the semifinal games. I wish it was like that. Now we're crossing, Region 2 to 3 and 4 and all that. Travel is what it is. It's no different for me to travel to Upperman or to travel to Anderson County. That's not going to be a big difference for me. I mean, it is what it is. It's not that big. You're getting a bus. It's going to cost you really the same. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Everybody can complain about all they want extra and all that, but at the end of the day, I'd love to see the best teams playing in the semifinals regardless. You see them 1 to 16 and let's battle it out. But that's not my decision. I don't get paid those big bucks to make those decisions for sure.
Final football question for you, Coach. When you look at the roster this year versus what you had a year ago, what are some key spring, summer position battles that you've got your eye on, you're excited to see play out here? And how, like, when you look at just the returning production, how good do you feel about what you've got back from a year ago?
Obviously I graduated 14 seniors that were really good football players. I Mr. Football player Carson Quillen, he's hard to, you can't replace a kid like that, but you got to. So really,
you can't do a Diego Pavia situation. You can't get an extra year.
He's that sucker don't turn 18 until he graduates. So I'd love to have him for another year, but
I'll get TSAA on the phone here, and we'll see what we can do.
If I can get him a 5th year for me, or I need to retire with him, one or the other, right?
I mean, hey.
No, but really excited to see what's going to happen at running back. Got a lot of guys that are going to compete for that job. We return, everybody that started at receiver at one point in the year is back. So really, you got Zayden Anderson out there, Taryn Clarity, guys coming back. They're the big-time players. Return my quarterback. Return 3 of my 5 offensive linemen. So really excited what we're going to do on offense. But you got to find out who that dude is at running back. But there's a lot of guys that'll compete for that job, and excited to see where we go from there. Defensively, it's got to be at linebacker. Lose a guy, Drew Armbrister, who's 3-year starter there for me, a 2-time All-State guy. So you got to figure out who's going to be that alpha male on defense. We were, graduated all 3 starting linebackers. So we got to find out, spring practice, who's going to be those dudes in there at linebacker. I'm really excited about who those guys are going to be. A lot of competition in there. But at the end of the day, who's going to be the alpha male that leads this defense for us? So really excited about what we got coming in spring practice. For us at High School, we think Greeneville has got 900 kids go to school. A lot of people don't really realize how many kids go here. We think Greenville's got a ton of kids, but it's only 900 kids go to school here. So a lot of kids play multiple sports. So spring practice for us is not going to have a lot of our kids are in spring sports from, I got a lot of baseball players, some soccer players. A lot of kids play track or do track. So a lot of guys doing other things during the spring around here, but we'll make the most of our spring practice. Really good for our offensive, defensive linemen. Hopefully some of those linebackers will get a lot of work during this time as well.
Spring break. It's right here for Tennessee. Eddie, you get your dream spring break getaway destination. Where are you going?
My situation is probably not going to be my decision with my, I've got two, a 15-year-old and a 13-year-old, and my wife. They're probably going to decide where that ultimate one is.
But where are you? I'm giving you the call here.
For me, yeah. I like go somewhere in the mountains. I got a camper. I like to just get on the side of a little river somewhere in a camp. In my camper where I can put out a fire and cook some dinner on a campfire or a
what are you
grill.
cooking?
I'm a big steak guy. I love steak.
Okay.
My kids love steak. So anytime that we can get out there and do stuff like that, we do as much as we can in that. So ultimate spring break for me would probably be just in the mountains somewhere, just relaxing. If I didn't have self-service, that'd probably be pretty nice.
Well, I know a place where you can go over there in Greeneville where there's no service and you can do the whole camper thing. Let me tell you, Eddie, this is it's not even a bone to pick, but my wife and I, we have the T-shirt to prove it. You might know where I'm going with this. The Firefly Festival we went to last year, Eddie, and let me tell you, that is the coldest I have been in such a long time. And it was like I forgot what it was. It was I'm blanking on when it was, but it was I don't know if you know off the top of your head of when the Firefly Festival is in Greeneville, but it was last year, and let me tell you, it's wild to see the amount of fireflies that just come up here at like 9 o'clock at night. I mean, it was wild to see them all come up, but man, I did not come prepared in terms of how cold it was going to be. It's not February we were doing it, and you're out, there's no service, and my wife and I, when we're leaving that night, Eddie, there's no lights. There's no lights. We went the wrong way, and we're in North Carolina for a little bit. Yeah. And I'm like, all right, I think we got to do a Yui here. We're going the wrong way. Have you done the Firefly Festival?
No, you must. Was it on Viking Mountain? Is that where it was?
It's one of the mountains.
Probably Viking, I'd say. A big mountain up here that does, because they always do something like that, and like up in Pigeon Forge and Gatlinburg, all that. But that whole mountain range kind of runs into each other, I think. So
Cherokee National Forest. That's it.
That's in where Viking Mountain is. It's
okay.
Cherokee. So
man, you're on your own.
I've never done that, the Firefly thing. So I have to check that out.
It's wild. You don't really know what you're walking into and there's a lottery system. It's a big deal. You're going in there and people are tailgating for this thing, and it's a whole deal, man. It would be an experience. I mean, it's a thing for the whole family. But and then they casually hey, watch out for snakes and stuff. I'm like, all right, man, we got no lights here. I'm not built for this. I don't know what I'm walking into here. Let's just see some fireflies and let's get out of here. Goodness gracious. Final thing here, and we'll get you out of here, Eddie. What's your game day routine? Do you have any superstitions that you follow and have always followed? Is there a certain kind of a coffee you do? Are you a gum guy? Certain meal?
With me, mine probably, I used to, when I was a younger coach, I used to always go, there used to be a Waggles here, but there's not anymore. I go by the Waggles, I get a new Sentinel. I used to always get new Sentinel because they put it in there, and do that was my routine. Get that because it had all the game predictions. Now everything's advanced to where it's on the computer, and 5-star preps really does a great job. Shout out to Big Jesse on that. So everything's online now. But with me, the bigger the game, I'll eat a lunch. After lunch, I'm probably not going to eat anymore. Just that's probably my big superstition. a lot of times we get in, we'll get a lunch and we'll play good. I'll get in the same lunch, every Friday night until we play bad. But besides that, obviously try to wear the same, if we play good, the same coaching gears and things like that. You keep it those type of things. But, if you're going to be a coach, a lot of times you got silly superstitions that, everybody picks up, and it might be one from year to year, just something you've done that don't matter for nothing. But on that Friday night, y'all have a big night. So if it stands out, I'll try to do it again. But just, year to year, nothing really stands out.
I love it. Eddie, how do the good folks who are tuning in, Greeneville fans, Greeneville supporters, how do they support everything you got going on this spring?
We got a great community support from for our football program. Right now we're in the heart of selling some strawberries, and we've sold a ton, and it's called us the community support. And we got a jumbotron that we got a couple years ago. It's a ton of support from that. But really a ton of support for Greeneville football and Greeneville athletics. Last night our basketball team won the region title. Our baseball and softball teams are kicking off. Track won the state championship last year. So really, and it's a great school system overall. So really special place to be at.
I love it. Eddie, keep up the great work, my friend, and we'll have to check back in again soon.
Yeah, appreciate it, man. Thanks for having me.
Nicely done, nephew. The Chase Thomas Podcast. Hell yeah.